The first day at the language school. Last month, after searching for weeks, I finally found a new job at a small but popular language school in the center of my city. I was excited and nervous at the same time because even though the school wasn't big, it had a very good reputation. Many students who studied there had successfully passed international exams or improved their speaking skills quickly. So I wanted to do well and not disappoint anyone. On the morning of my first day, I woke up earlier than usual. I couldn't sleep much the night before because I kept thinking about how everything would go. What if I made mistakes? What if the students didn't like me? What if the main teacher thought I wasn't good enough? These questions kept spinning in my mind, but I tried to stay positive. When I arrived at the school building, I felt a mix of excitement and curiosity. The entrance had large glass doors, and inside I could hear soft music playing. The hallway walls were covered with posters showing different countries: Spain, Japan, Brazil, Canada, because the school offered many language programs. There were also shelves filled with books, flashcards, toys for younger learners, and certificates that students had earned over the years. Everything looked very lively, like a place where learning actually felt enjoyable. The receptionist welcomed me warmly and showed me around the building. I visited 5 different classrooms, each painted in a different color. The blue room was for beginners, the yellow room was for kids, the green room was for conversation clubs, and the red room was for advanced students preparing for exams. There was also a small teacher's room where everyone could relax, drink coffee, and discuss lesson plans. On a long wooden table, there was a huge basket full of snacks and biscuits. I immediately felt a little better. While I was waiting for the main teacher, Sarah, I looked around the teacher's room. There were whiteboards covered with sticky notes, grammar charts, and weekly schedules. The room smelled like fresh coffee, and the sunlight coming from the window made it feel peaceful. After a few minutes, Sarah walked in with a friendly smile. She was a woman in her mid-30s with short brown hair and glasses. She introduced herself and said she was happy to work with me. She explained my duties, helping students speak more, preparing worksheets, checking simple homework, and assisting during games or group work. She told me not to stress, because everyone had been new at some point. Her calm voice and positive attitude made me feel less nervous. When the first class started, I entered the room behind her. There were about 12 students, all between 14 and 17 years old. Some looked confident, while others seemed shy. They all turned to look at me, and for a moment, I felt nervous again. But Sarah introduced me and told them I would be helping with speaking activities. The students smiled and nodded. To break the ice, we played a warm-up game called 2 Truths and a Lie. Each student said 2 true facts about themselves and 1 lie, and the class had to guess which one was false. Some of their answers were funny. One student said he once ate 10 hamburgers in a day. Another said she met a famous singer last year. The room filled with laughter, and I began to relax. I even joined the game, and the students tried to guess which of my sentences was the lie. As the lesson continued, we practiced dialogues, checked vocabulary, and did a short listening activity. I walked around the classroom, helping students with pronunciation and encouraging them to speak. I realized I actually enjoyed this job. The students were friendly, curious, and open-minded. Their energy made the atmosphere very comfortable. However, near the end of the class, something unexpected happened. A quiet boy, sitting at the very back, who hadn't spoken the entire time, raised his hand slowly. His name was Daniel. He looked nervous, as if he wasn't used to asking questions. I walked toward him and said gently, "Yes, Daniel? How can I help?" He hesitated for a moment, then took a deep breath and said, "Teacher, I need help preparing for a very important English exam. It's not part of the school program. It's personal. Can you help me after classes?" The way he said it made the whole room go silent for a second. I didn't understand why, but his request felt serious. Sarah looked at me with a surprised expression, and some of the other students whispered quietly to each other. It was clear that Daniel wasn't asking for normal extra practice. This was something bigger, something meaningful. And just like that, my first day became much more interesting than I expected.
Daniel's secret request. After the class finished, the students slowly left the room, chatting and laughing as they packed their bags. I stayed behind to help Sarah clean the whiteboard and organize the materials. But my mind was still on Daniel's unusual question. He had looked so nervous, almost scared when he asked for extra help. It didn't feel like a simple exam request. It felt personal. When the classroom finally became quiet, I noticed Daniel was still sitting in his seat. His backpack was open, but he wasn't moving. He seemed lost in thought, staring at his notebook as if he didn't know how to start packing. It was clear he was waiting for me. I approached him slowly. "Hey, Daniel," I said gently. "Do you want to talk now?" He looked up immediately, as if waking from a dream. "Yes, if you have time," he said in a soft voice. Sarah noticed the situation and gave me a little nod before leaving the room. "Take your time," she whispered as she walked out. The door closed behind her, and suddenly the classroom felt quieter than ever. Daniel sat up straight, trying to appear confident, but I could see his hands shaking slightly. I sat at the desk in front of him, giving him enough space so he wouldn't feel pressured. "So," I said, "you mentioned a special exam. Can you tell me more about it?" He took a deep breath and began speaking slowly, choosing his words carefully. "It's called the International Youth Language Test. It's not very well known, but it's important for a scholarship I want to apply for. If I pass, I can study abroad for 1 year. It's my dream." He paused for a moment, and I noticed how his eyes became more emotional. "Studying abroad," he repeated quietly, as if the idea felt distant. "That sounds amazing," I said with a smile. "But why didn't you ask Sarah or another teacher for help?" Daniel looked down at his notebook, almost embarrassed. "Because it's complicated." When he didn't continue, I encouraged him softly. "Don't worry, you can trust me. Whatever it is, I'm here to help." He hesitated again, then finally said, "I don't want the other students to know. Some of them already make fun of me because I'm quiet. If they find out I'm preparing for a scholarship, they will think I'm pretending to be better than them." His voice trembled a little, and I felt my heart sink. Bullying. It was a problem many students faced, and Daniel was clearly dealing with it too. "I understand," I said calmly, "and you're not pretending to be better. You're trying to improve your future. There's nothing wrong with that." Daniel nodded slowly, but I could tell he still felt insecure. He continued speaking, this time more quietly. "My parents don't believe I can win the scholarship. They say it's too difficult. They think I should focus on normal school and forget about big dreams. But," he looked up at me with eyes full of determination, "I don't want to give up." That moment told me everything I needed to know. Daniel wasn't just preparing for a test. He was fighting against doubt, from his classmates, from his family, and even from himself. I smiled encouragingly. Well, I think you can do it. And if you want, we can study together after classes. I can help you with reading, speaking, writing, whatever you need. Daniel's eyes widened. Really? Are you sure? I don't want to bother you. I'm not bothering you at all. Helping students is my job. And besides, I believe in you. For the first time since I met him, Daniel smiled, a small, shy, but sincere smile. Thank you, he whispered. We made a plan to meet 3 times a week after school. Daniel promised to bring the practice materials for the scholarship test, and I told him I would prepare exercises too. Before leaving, he said something that surprised me. Teacher, I didn't ask you just because I need help. I asked because you listened to me today. No one really listens. His words stayed with me long after he left the room. Sometimes all a student needed was someone who truly cared. As I walked to the teacher's room, I felt something strong inside me. Motivation, responsibility, and maybe even a bit of excitement. I wasn't just working at a language school anymore. I was part of someone's dream. When I entered the teacher's room, Sarah was waiting for me with a curious expression. So, she asked with a smile, what did he tell you? I sat down, still thinking about Daniel's story, and answered, it's more serious than we thought. And this was only the beginning.
The first study session. The next day, I arrived at the language school earlier than usual. Normally, I like to come just 10 minutes before my shift, but after talking to Daniel, something inside me changed. I felt responsible, not only as a teacher, but almost like a mentor. I wanted to make sure I was prepared for our first study session. When I entered the teacher's room, Sarah was already there, drinking coffee and reading her lesson plan. She looked up at me with a smile. "You're early today," she said. I nodded. "Yeah, I want to prepare some practice materials for Daniel." Sarah's smile grew softer. "I knew he was studying for something, but I didn't know it was this important. You're doing a good thing helping him." I shrugged a little, but inside, her words made me feel proud. "I just want him to have a chance," I said. For the next hour, I worked on creating reading exercises, vocabulary lists, and speaking questions. The scholarship exam Daniel mentioned wasn't extremely difficult, but it required strong comprehension skills. I also printed some sample test pages I found in the school's resource folder. By the time the first class started, my desk was covered with neat stacks of worksheets. Throughout the day, I kept checking the clock, waiting for the final class to end so I could meet Daniel. When the last group of students finally left, the school became quiet again. The sun was starting to set outside, painting the sky orange and pink. Daniel arrived exactly at 5 p.m., holding a thick folder filled with papers. He looked a little tired, but also excited. "Are we starting today?" he asked politely. I smiled. "Yes, of course. Come sit here." We chose a small round table in the corner of the teacher's room. It wasn't fancy, but it was private enough for him to feel comfortable. The beginning of real work. Daniel opened his folder carefully, like he was protecting something very precious. Inside, there were worksheets, vocabulary notebooks, grammar summaries, and a long to-do list he had written for himself. Some of the papers were messy or folded, showing that he had been studying alone for a long time. I tried preparing by myself, but sometimes I don't understand what the instructions want, and speaking practice is hard when you're alone. I nodded. "Don't worry, that's why I'm here." We started with a short reading text. I asked Daniel to read it aloud, and he did, but I noticed how nervous he was. His voice shook a little, and he kept correcting himself even when he didn't need to. After he finished, I said, "You don't have to be perfect. Just do your best. Mistakes are normal." He looked relieved. "I know. I just don't want to fail." I said, We're going to practice together. You're not alone now." Slowly, Daniel relaxed. We discussed the meaning of the text, identified difficult words, and answered the comprehension questions. He made some mistakes, but he also surprised me with how fast he understood grammar patterns and how good his memory was. After reading practice, we moved to speaking. I asked him questions like, "Why do you want this scholarship? What challenges have you faced? What do you hope to achieve in the future?" At first, his answers were short and shy, but after a few minutes, he opened up. "I want to study abroad because I want to prove to myself that I can do something difficult. Everyone around me thinks I'm weak. I want to change that." His words were simple, but they carried a lot of emotion. This wasn't just an exam. This was his fight. A connection forms. As the session continued, I noticed how determined Daniel was. Even when he didn't know the answer, he tried again and again until he got it right. I respected him for that. Many students gave up easily, but Daniel had something special: quiet strength. After almost 2 hours of studying, I suggested taking a short break. Daniel hesitated. "Can we continue? I don't want to waste time." I shook my head gently. Breaks aren't a waste of time. They help your brain work better. He finally agreed and took a sip of water. Then he asked a question I wasn't expecting. "Do you think I can pass the exam?" I looked at him directly. "Yes," I said confidently. "You can pass, but you need to believe it too." He stared at his notebook for a moment. "I'll try," he whispered. A sudden interruption. Just when we were about to continue, something unexpected happened. The door to the teacher's room opened, and 2 students from Daniel's class walked in. They stopped when they saw him sitting with me. One of them raised an eyebrow. "Daniel, what are you doing here?" Daniel froze. His shoulders tensed, and his face turned pale. I saw fear in his eyes, fear of exactly what he had talked about yesterday. "We're just studying," I said, calmly, trying to ease the tension. But the boys exchanged a look that made Daniel uncomfortable. One of them smirked and said, "Studying? For what? You never study with teachers. Since when are you special?" Daniel looked down, saying nothing. I stepped in. "Everyone has the right to get help if they want to. He's working on something important." But the boys didn't seem convinced. They shrugged and walked away, but their expressions told me they would talk about this later. After they left, Daniel sighed deeply. "I knew this would happen," he said in a sad voice. "Tomorrow, they will tell everyone." I leaned forward. "Let them talk. You're working for your future, not theirs." But Daniel didn't answer. I could see he was hurt. Still, after a few seconds, he looked up and said, "Can we continue studying?" That sentence alone showed how strong he really was. We worked for another hour, and when Daniel finally packed his things, he looked tired but proud. "Thank you," he said softly. "No one has ever helped me like this." I replied, "You're welcome. See you tomorrow." As he left the school building, I watched his small figure disappear down the hallway, and I realized something important. This wasn't just teaching anymore. This was becoming a turning point in both of our lives.
Whispers at school. The next day, when I arrived at the language school, I immediately felt that something was different. Usually, the students chatted loudly in the hallway, laughing, joking, or running to their classrooms. But that morning, the atmosphere felt heavier, like everyone knew a secret and was waiting to talk about it. As I walked through the corridor, I heard small whispers. "Did you hear about Daniel? He was studying with the new teacher." "Why him? He never talks." I sighed quietly. So the boys from yesterday had already spread the news. When I entered the classroom, Daniel was already there, sitting in the back as always. But this time, he didn't look relaxed or calm. He looked tense, almost shrinking in his seat. His hands were folded tightly on the desk, and he was staring at the floor. A few students glanced at him with curious expressions. Not angry, not mean, just curious. But even that was enough to make Daniel uncomfortable. Sarah walked into the room and started the warm-up game as usual, but I could see she had also noticed the tension. She looked at me with a question in her eyes, and I nodded slightly. She understood. During group work, some students whispered to each other while looking at Daniel. He pretended not to notice, but I could see his cheeks turning red. At one point, one student asked loudly, "So, Daniel, are you going to become a genius now?" A few students giggled. It wasn't a terrible insult, but it was embarrassing. Daniel didn't reply. He just kept his eyes on the book. I wanted to step in, but Sarah did it first. "Everyone focuses on their own work," she said firmly. "Helping a teacher after class is normal. Anyone can do it." Her voice wasn't angry, but strong enough to silence the whispers. After that, the lesson continued without problems. Break time conversation. When class ended, students left quickly, but Daniel stayed behind again. I waited near the board, pretending to erase something so he wouldn't feel rushed. After almost a full minute of silence, he finally spoke. "They already started talking," he said quietly. "I know, but it will calm down soon." He shook his head. "You don't understand. They think I'm trying to show off. They think I want attention, but I just want to study. Why is that so strange?" His voice cracked a little, but he didn't cry. Daniel wasn't weak. He was just tired of being misunderstood. I sat at the desk in front of him. "Daniel, listen to me. When someone tries to change or do something important, other people usually talk. Not because they hate you, because they don't understand you." He didn't answer, but he was listening. "And trust me," I continued, "in a few days, they will forget. Students always do." He gave a small smile. "Maybe." "Definitely," I said with a confident tone. Another study session. When classes ended, Daniel and I met again in the teacher's room. This time, he looked more focused. Maybe caulking helped him clear his mind. We started with a speaking exercise based on pictures. Daniel had to describe situations, explain reasons, and give opinions. At first, he hesitated, searching for the right words, but after warming up, he became much more fluent. Then we practiced writing. I gave him a task. Write about a challenge you faced and how you overcame it. He wrote slowly, carefully, and seriously. When I read his paragraph, I was surprised. Not because it was perfect, it wasn't, but because it was honest and emotional. He wrote about feeling invisible, about wanting to prove his worth, and about trying to become stronger. "You wrote this very well," I told him. He looked embarrassed. "Really?" "Yes. Your writing isn't English. It has meaning. That's important." Daniel seemed proud, even if he didn't say anything. A small breakthrough. Near the end of our study session, something unexpected and positive happened. One of the boys who had teased him yesterday, the shorter one, peeked into the teacher's room. When he saw us studying, he didn't make a joke. Instead, he walked halfway inside and said, "Daniel, do you have the homework answers?" Daniel blinked, confused. "The vocabulary ones?" "Yeah." Daniel grabbed his notebook and showed him the answers. The boy thanked him and left quickly. After the door closed, Daniel looked at me with a confused smile. "What was that?" he asked. I laughed. Sometimes people act tough because they don't understand something, but when they need help, they suddenly become kinder. Daniel nodded. I guess. Maybe they don't hate me. Exactly. Today was better than yesterday. That's progress. He smiled for real this time. The walk home. When our study session ended, Daniel packed his things and walked toward the exit. I walked with him until the entrance door. "See you tomorrow," I said. "See you tomorrow, teacher." Then he paused, thought for a second, and added, "And thank you for not giving up on me." Before I could reply, he walked out into the evening air. I watched him go, feeling something warm in my chest. It wasn't just teaching anymore. It was helping someone find confidence they never knew they had. And deep down, I knew the story wasn't even close to finished.